India's auto sector has been facing major disruptions due to COVID-19 since March this year. Add to that 2 consecutive years of degrowth. At the annual convention of the Society of Indian Automobile Manufacturers, India's industry veterans pitched for a GST cut and a scrappage policy, saying the auto sector is going through one of the toughest periods in history. The government's focus, and this came from 3 cabinet ministers who addressed the convention, was on Atmanirbharta, greater localization and stronger export growth as well. Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal urged the industry to negotiate lower royalty payments and said that the government was looking at innovative credit guarantee schemes for exporters and making the industry competitive as well. Reducing logistics cost is also on the priority list, according to Piyush Goyal. Heavy Industries Minister Prakash Javadekar said that he would take up the auto sector's demand for a GST reduction with the Finance Minister and the Prime Minister, and a global champion scheme is also on the anvil. So how are auto industry leaders looking at these messages today? We are joined by a power-packed panel. Venu Srinivasan, Chairman and Managing Director of TVS Motor Company; Pawan Goenka, Managing Director and CEO Mahindra & Mahindra; and Gunter Butzschek, Managing Director of Tata Motors. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here on CNBC-TV18. Mr. Srinivasan, I'd like to begin with you. There were a lot of positive words on a GST reduction for 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers, on a scrappage policy as well. But we have been hearing these assurances at previous SIAM conventions as well. Do you think these measures will see the light of day this time around, or the auto industry is on its own?
Well, as far as 2-wheelers are concerned, we had the finance minister going publicly in the news and saying that 2-wheelers do need a break. They're at 28%, which is the highest levels, and therefore we were looking for a reduction. It has not happened as of yet, but I hope at the next GST Council meeting, they will take it up.
Right. Gunter, if I could get you in, there was a lot of emphasis on making the auto industry competitive as well. There were reassuring messages. So after the SIAM convention, how do you feel about the Indian automobile industry's growth story? Have you come out reassured from this 3-hour-long SIAM convention?
Let's not give me the chance to actually summarize the spirit I have sensed talking to some of my colleagues after the event, but also listening to the word of thanks that got expressed after the 3 parts of this morning's session. And I think what we have all seen was a committed government. All 3 honorable ministers were pretty much aligned on the messages. They have given a good deal of enthusiasm and encouragement to the industry. And we have also got appreciation of the work done by the industry. And with the appreciation, we have also heard a clear commitment to support us on the way further. What I do appreciate was the one statement made that there's openness to actually consult the industry, to discuss the necessary reforms, and to jointly create the required roadmaps in order to enable us, the Indian auto sector, to realize our full potential on the world stage. So we have heard words of we need a richer and deeper collaboration between all the stakeholders. Right. And the good thing was, it was not just meant to the government and limited to the government and the industry. We also heard a reference made to academia and other institutes. And this all summarized on the making the automotive industry more Atmanirbhar. Shifting the balance from imports to exports is encouraging, and it's a clear direction where we as an industry will actually work towards hand in glove with the government.
Okay. Dr. Goenka, if I can get you in, you're also heading the steering committee on advancing local value addition. Looking at the fiscal constraints that are there for the government, we're still reeling under the COVID-19 pandemic. We don't have a vaccine just yet. What do you think are the doables right now? A number of things are being considered by the government, but we don't know what's really in the pipeline right now? Do you foresee certain schemes coming from the auto industry in the next few months? Do you think anything is at the stage of conclusion?
Well, Prakshit, let me be practical. Frankly, given the current fiscal situation that the government has, no matter how much we justify saying that increased volume will offset for GST reduction per unit, I think the government is going to find it very difficult to reduce GST for automobiles. They may do some exception for some sector, that's a different thing, but clearly if they do it for one sector, there are many other who are waiting in the wings for GST reduction. So I'm not going to count too much on the GST reduction as the way to revive demand. But I think there are many other levers that can be pulled right now to help in demand creation. Not the least of that is to make money available at a lower cost to the consumer. Because finally what matters is the EMI and not what the retail selling price is. And if the rate reduction that has happened in the repo rate is fully transmitted to the retail customer, I think that will have similar effect as GST reduction. Because still there is 1.5–2 percentage point of repo transmission that has not happened. And that's something that's very doable. Somehow RBI needs to be able to, I should say, arm twist the lenders to be able to get the repo rate reduction pass on. So I would say that as the number one priority. The number two priority and doable is the scrappage policy that has been talked about a bit and was mentioned again today in the convention. And that's something that is a win-win-win, because not only will it increase volume, it will also help to reduce pollution and also help to reduce the fuel consumption. So these are the two things that I think very doable, both politically as well as financially. GST rate would be nice. I would love it if it happens, but I'm not going to count on it for it to happen, other than maybe something symbolic that might happen for one or two sectors.
Right, because this is also an issue that has to be decided by the states in the GST Council. It is a tricky issue after all. Mr. Srinivasan, if I could get you in once again. We're seeing green shoots in the passenger car segment, especially in the entry-level cars and in the two-wheeler segment. Do you see this demand that we're looking at? Is this sustainable going into the festive season? What's your outlook going to be?
Our outlook is it is sustainable, because in 2 months, in April, May, we've lost almost all production. So we're already 16% below last year, even if we maintain the same volume. And therefore, I don't think we will go down further. And we will probably maintain last year's level, which already was lower than the previous year.
Right. Mr. Butschek, if I can get you back in, there is a lot of focus this time in the auto industry on conserving cash in this pandemic, but at the same time focusing on quality, focusing on growth numbers, getting those volumes. At Tata Motors, when it comes to striking the right balance between demand and supply, managing this amidst the pandemic, how are you approaching the market?
I think you have brought one of the key concerns of the entire industry, not only talking on behalf of the automotive manufacturers, also talking about the suppliers and our dealers, so the entire ecosystem. Cash is king. I think we all have embarked on the journey how to conserve cash on the one hand side, while on the other side looking into cost reduction opportunities across the fixed cost as well as the variable cost. Because what we need to manage is to actually turn into positive cash flows, while at the same point of time not missing the train as far as the future developments are concerned. So that means we have to review our investments. We have to unlock investments in various non-core businesses. And we need to put value creation as the top priority. So as you have recently heard, we have announced a cost-saving program of 1,500 crore. At the same point of time, a cash improvement program of 6,000 crore. And this is exactly, without going into the details, the balance we have just asked for, the balance we need to strike between dealing with the immediate request to conserve the cash, while at the same point of time committing the necessary investments to meet changes in the regulatory environment, but also to ensure that our product portfolio is going to kept relevant in the market. But it also includes that certain additions to the product portfolio get postponed, get reviewed, and this is key critical at this point of time, where we do hope that we can actually strike the fine balance at the end, that we get through the crisis, while at the same point of time don't compromise on the future. We think we have been able to strike the balance, but again, it's all subject to the further developments. To the question you raised earlier, what can we expect from the fiscal year 21? Is what we have seen in the last 2 months a structural and a sustainable revival on which we can actually build and can even go beyond last year's levels, as it has just been mentioned by Venu, because last year is not the right reference. We actually need to lift our aspiration to the fiscal year 18-19. And the question is, when can we actually go back to this level? Because this is the one where the entire automotive industry and its ecosystem will actually be on a profitable growth path and will have the opportunity to invest in the future.
All right. Mr. Goenka, if I can get you in. Today, we also saw reports in the Japanese media how the Japanese government is going to incentivize companies to shift supply chains from China, and India and Bangladesh are among those countries which would be on that concession list where moving supply chains would be encouraged. Do you think India and the Indian government now needs to study those examples? What are countries like Japan doing? How did Singapore, Vietnam, Indonesia get that competitive advantage? Do you think those models need to be studied in detail, maybe replicate them as well? Dr. Goenka?
So, Parikshit, if you allow me, let me take just a few seconds on the demand question that you had asked earlier. And the reason I'm coming into this, that we had an executive committee meeting of SIAM immediately after the annual convention, where every CEO, without exception, said that right now the demand is outpacing the supply. Except in the medium and heavy commercial vehicle segment, which is completely right now on a halt mode. Other than that, every CEO said the demand is outpacing supply. And every CEO thought that at least till Diwali, which means till 15th of November, that situation is likely to continue. What is also very good news is that there is no constraint today on retail financing, except for the rate that I talked about earlier. And there's no constraint today on the working capital that our suppliers are having or working capital that dealers are having. So in many ways, while there's a lot of gloom and doom, I just want to convey this to your listeners that the sector today, I think, is in a much better shape than what any of us would have thought 2 or 3 months ago, both in terms of demand and also in terms of supply. To be able to reach that level of supply in such a short time when the industry had completely come to a halt is actually quite remarkable. So in terms of cash flow, in terms of liquidity, in terms of supply, in terms of demand, I think industry today is better off than what we thought, except for the commercial, medium and heavy commercial vehicle segment. And as you know, that passenger vehicles actually had a growth during this month. Now, coming to a question on pulling manufacturing from China to India, as rather surprised and happy to see the news item from Japan, that Japan is going to incentivize moving manufacturers out of China to other countries, including India and Bangladesh, which is quite interesting. But I think the Indian government and India, I should say not Indian government, but India, should not rely on Japan doing something for India to grow manufacturing. It is something that we have to do. And we have to look at how do we make it worthwhile for those who are leaving China to come into India rather than going somewhere else. And finally, it comes down to only one thing, competitiveness of India compared to others in two cents. What is the cost of manufacturing in India? Overall cost, not just the labor cost, not just the electricity, not just the logistic cost, overall cost. And what is the ease of doing business in India? And this is what the government is focusing on, has to focus on. And I think we have made tremendous strides in the last couple of years in ease of doing business. But I think still we have a lot to do to attract the manufacturing from China to India. And as you mentioned earlier, that I'm working on this committee, and I can see a clear sort of desire by the government of India to do everything that they possibly can, because this is really the opportunity, in some sense, a God-sent opportunity on how do we suddenly make Indian manufacturing become a lot bigger than what it has been and grow much faster than what it has in the last 4 or 5 years. And there are lots of different things that we have to work on. There's no single sort of silver bullet that will suddenly bring all the manufacturing companies into India. There are a lot of little things that will be different for different industries.
Okay.
Pharmaceutical may need something else, automotive may need something else, electronics may need something else. In some places, we'll require PLI, some places we require PMP, some places incentive, but I think it can be done.
Yeah. It can be done. All right. On that note, we're going to take a short break on this broadcast, but I request Mr. Srinivasan, Mr. Goenka, and Mr. Butchek to stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching our special broadcast on the auto industry's roadmap for growth. And with us right now, Mr. Venu Srinivasan, Chairman, TVS Motor Company, Pawan Goenka, MD and CEO, Mahindra & Mahindra, and Gunter Butchek, MD, Tata Motors. Mr. Srinivasan, if I can come to you, incentives aside, a lot of things are being spoken about, global champions, PLI, phased manufacturing program. But beyond these, would you demand policy certainty on top of it all, and maybe a 10-year clear roadmap for the auto industry? Do you think that is the kind of certainty that the auto industry needs right now, Mr. Srinivasan?
Let me say this first. I think India has become competitive thanks to the roadmap that government and the industry rolled out 20 years ago. And in fact, Pawan was the chairman of the technical committee, and I was president of SIAM then. And we rolled out saying we'll catch up with the world on emissions in 20 years' time, which we have done. Therefore, all our products are much more capable of being exported world over today. So we are in a better position. And government is rolling out programs also on safety to be on par with the world. So really the only way to roll out anything is build highways, improve infrastructure, do government spending, and boost demand. I think that is the most important thing that we need from the government. And we need stability in fiscal policies, taxation, import duties, and controls so that people can plan their investments for the long term.
Right. Mr. Butchek, if I can get you in right now, a lot of talk right now is on Atmanirbharta, self-reliance, import substitution. Our imports from China in terms of components did come down 12% in the last fiscal, but was still a solid 4 billion. What do you think is the roadmap when it comes to reducing reliance on China? By when do you think these components that we get from China could be manufactured independently here in India? How long would it take? How many years?
I think the way you have phrased the question is far too generic. There's not a universal answer to say, and in 5 years' time, you're going to be completely self-reliant, self-sufficient in India, assuming that we can actually build up the capacity, first of all, to bring the technology, to set up the capacity, to ramp up the same, and to create a scale that's required to be globally competitive. So therefore, from my point of view, whatever the aspiration is at the end, it requires an intensive dialogue between the government and the industry, between us, the manufacturers, and the suppliers, in order to really create a joint roadmap that on the one side fits the aspiration, but on the other side, it's also a credible and sustainable approach, and which finally helps what is the overall interest as far as India is concerned, to establish India as a globally competitive automotive hub for vehicles, but even more so for components. And this is actually one of the driving forces. So let's actually put the whole issue of China aside. As we expect to become the third largest automotive market in the world, as it has just been mentioned, that with the changes in the regulatory environment, we are going to close the gap to the global standards. We are going to become, from a technology point of view, globally competitive. We can create lots of scale ourselves, in particular if we as an industry get united and focused on a joint roadmap for this kind of localization effort. And as we actually build scale via India, we will automatically become globally competitive. It's not just about China. It's about our vision, call it the automotive mission plan, as it was called out earlier, largely focusing on volume. I think we actually need to take the volume into the question, what is required to live up to the mission? What is our joint vision? And with the support that has been offered this morning by the government, where we're all singing literally from the same hymn sheet in this regard, we just need to create a credible roadmap. And then I think one of the strengths of this industry is that when it comes to the objective, after clarifying the objective, and it comes to the execution, we have an incredible executional power while being focused on the target to be accomplished. And this kind of inclusive approach, as mentioned earlier, is going to give us the opportunities on the way ahead to really build India a global hub.
Right. Okay, Mr. Butchek, very quickly, what do you feel about the royalty issue? The minister today said that automotive companies need to take up this issue with their partners, reduce royalties for the next 3 years. Do you think that affects innovation?
Well, from my point of view, it's not going to affect innovation at all. I think it's actually the opposite, because if we would like to become a hub, an automotive hub, we cannot just become a manufacturing hub, where on the one hand side, the Indian demand and the size of the market is going to be leveraged, and on the other side, the attractive labor costs for being globally competitive. We need to become an automotive hub, also as far as the engineering capability is concerned, because an engineering footprint is what we urgently need, because to be a hub, you need to build your own intellectual property, and we have something to offer to the world, which might bring a revolution as far as technical progress is concerned. We have the ability to provide a prudent approach on engineering, and with the prudent approach of engineering, we can actually make technical progress more affordable, as we can actually bring the technical progress much faster to the Indian customers as our contribution to sustainability of mobility in India.
Okay, Mr. Goenka, if I can get you in, when it comes to selling in this kind of suppressed economic atmosphere, what are some of the steps that auto industries can take on their own? For example, Mahindra & Mahindra, how are you going to attract customers at such a time? There is also intense competition in the market, especially in the UV space.
Well,
Piyush Goyal spoke about attractive schemes, attractive prices.
So there are a couple of things that we need to look at. One is there are changes that are short-term, which are happening because of current situation, and there are changes that's going to happen in the long term for good. Okay. Now, one of the things that's going to change in selling is the digital is going to play a very big role, and the customers would tend more and more to do all their shopping online, and perhaps never ever visit the dealership to buy a car. And some of the companies, including Mahindra, have already launched platforms to be able to do end-to-end purchase, complete purchase online, and get the car delivered to their doorsteps. And I think that's going to be a change that probably will gain more and more currency. And I won't be surprised if at some point of time, maybe half our cars are sold that way. What I'm surprised at in the current scenario is there is absolutely no requirement of significantly or even marginally higher incentive than we normally do at a time like this. In fact, customers are looking to buy cars because cars are in short supply, and there is no demand of extra incentive. The thing that we have to keep in mind is that the auto companies have just come out of BS6 cost increase, and most companies, partly because of COVID-19 situation, have not passed on the full impact of BS6 in the pricing. So if anything, in the next few months, you will see that that they will have to finally pass on the impact, because auto business is not a highly profitable business. 8 to 10% margin is considered very good margin. So I don't think there's room for auto companies to do a significant price discounting from where we are. So I won't expect a price war. I won't expect significant discounts to happen. In fact, I would expect higher efficiency to come into selling. And the cost of selling, which currently maybe is as high as 8 to 10%, should come down with all the digitization that is happening and contactless selling that will happen, and other efficiencies that will get built into inventory management, logistic management. And therefore, if anything, we would be looking at a reduction in cost of selling and not in terms of increase in incentive to sell.
Okay, I'll have to take final comments now. Mr. Venu Srinivasan, why don't you leave us with your thoughts on how to revive the auto sector going forward, and one factor which would probably determine the growth of the auto sector going forward?
The auto sector is directly and very highly correlated with economic growth. So I think any steps the government would take to stoke economic growth in the country would be for the benefit of the automotive sector. What we have been seeing over the last few quarters is a declining growth in GDP, and that worries us more than anything else. There's nothing you can do to just sell more vehicles. You have to create a demand, and for that, income has to grow, per capita income has to grow.
Right. We've completely run out of time, but I'd like to thank Gunter Butzcheck for joining us here, Pavan Goenka, Venu Srinivasan. It's been an excellent discussion. We had the who's who of the auto industry right here telling us about their views on where the auto industry is moving and what the industry can do and what the government can do in terms of interventions to spur demand. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.